Hare Krishna, Krishna Chandra Prabhu, my obeisances to you. Hare Krishna. Hey. Oh, Jai Rasangi's here. All the way from sunny California.
I'm walking. I know, see how sunny and beautiful. Look at the ocean.
Wow.
Really gorgeous.
Wonderful. Yeah. You're blessed, Rasangi. You're blessed in more ways than one.
How are you doing, Gaura?
Well, actually, if I could have canceled, I would have, but I want to be responsible because I got in really late from taking a class in home recording. So my whole day has been thrown off, but I like to be responsible and be here, even if nobody comes.
I forgot to mention today is the disappearance day of your Guru Maharaj.
Of your spiritual master. Okay.
Yes.
Bhakti Vaibhav Puri Maharaj.
Yes.
Before we start, did you want to say something, or after did you want to say something, or?
Perhaps later. I just got home, so I feel like if I say something, it won't be very good. Okay.
All right. So I guess we can start. Rupanuga Prabhu has been highly recommending a new book that was just released by our godbrother Purnaprajna Prabhu. I think he's been the husband of our god sister Narayani Devi Dasi, and it's a book challenging Darwin. I think it's called Beyond Darwin, and I was sent a soft copy. So I'm wondering, until more devotees arrive, if you would mind if I read a few paragraphs of that.
Can I say something?
Yes.
In that nature. So I'm reading so many books, but in one of the books I'm reading, maybe it's Samarani's book. She said that at one point, Srila Prabhupada told Rameshwar to offer Sarup Damodar and the scientists $10,000 a month. That was
yes.
in the 70s.
Yeah.
Further their work, it was so important to him.
Thank you. It's been completely forgotten.
$10,000 a month?
Yeah.
Take away from the luxury departments like the art department and something else. But she was like shocked that that's how important the scientists are to public.
Who was saying this to you? Who was saying this to you?
This is Shamarani in her book, The
Okay.
Art of Spiritual Life.
Okay.
And then she got Rameshwar's letter is there. The letter to Rameshwar saying
yes.
that is there.
No, I've read it I've read that letter a few times. And Prabhupada further says, unless Shamarani mentions this, that Prabhupada said that I think it's supposed to come from the BBT, correct? The money's supposed to, yeah. And Prabhupada said if it didn't come from the BBT, it would come from him personally. Yeah, to double emphasize. So thank you for that, Rasangi. Yeah, and you're.
I just read that. And
Yeah.
I wanted to tell you anyway, and then you bring up the scientific book. Awesome.
Great. Okay, I'm going to launch into it. I'm going to launch
into
into it.
I'm walking.
Pardon? Pardon?
I can't read because I'm walking. I'll read when I finish walking, okay?
Yeah, fine. Okay, I'll start then. Thank you. I appreciate your giving the further emphasis a lot, because I didn't know if anyone would object. Okay, so where are we? Okay, here it is. Good, I found it. I hope you don't object, Krishna Chandra Prabhu.
I don't see why I would. What book is it again?
I believe it's entitled Beyond Darwin. It's a new book that just came out, highly recommended by Rupanuga Prabhu, Prabhupada's one of the very first disciples. It was written by Purnaprajna Prabhu, a godbrother who has written, Ramayana, Mahabharata, Chaitanya Chari. He's given summary studies and synopsises of many. In other words, he's a very experienced writer, and he's addressing a topic that's very dear to Srila Prabhupada. So, okay, chapter 1. Did life evolve from molecules? In 1973, a PhD candidate in organic chemistry in California, T.D. Singh, which is actually Sarup Damodar Maharaj, Bhakti Sarup Damodar Maharaj, attended a lecture by a prominent biochemist, Stanley Miller, about the origin of life. The professor's experiments are described in virtually every biology book, and he had been nominated for a Nobel Prize. During his lecture, Dr. Miller talked about the information of amino acids on the early Earth, explaining that these were building blocks of life. Afterwards, the student met Stanley Miller and challenged, "Your topic is the origin of life, but you only talked about the possible formation of amino acids. Suppose I were to give you the chemical materials, such as the amino acids and the big molecules like DNA and RNA, which you say are necessary for the maintenance of life. Do you think you could create life?" The biochemist replied, "I do not know. Such scientists are in the category of, quote unquote, I do not know, unquote. And yet they publicly claim to understand how life originated on Earth. It is a fact that in all the biology textbooks and courses given in schools and universities, as well as in the media, the idea that life randomly evolved from chemicals is presented as if it were an irrefutable fact. It is assumed that some billions of years ago, the first living cell somehow randomly came to be in a pond or in an ocean. Everyone admits that this cannot be observed because it happened long ago and because we do not see it happening now in nature. The scientific method begins with observation, and thus there is no scientific evidence that the first living cell randomly formed from chemicals. Evolutionary scientists assume that the first living cell must have assembled by chance, and then they attempt to show in their laboratories how this might have happened. The first chapter of this book will describe in detail how scientists researching the origin of life cannot even begin to assemble a single living cell in their laboratories, although they publicly declare that all the life forms we see around us originated from simple molecules. It will also discuss the reason why evolutionary scientists make such unverified claims, and it will give examples of how they use their prestigious positions to suppress alternative views and convince the public that they are undisputed authorities. Go anywhere in the world and ask physics professors for a definition of matter, and all will say, quote, "Matter is that which has mass and occupies space." Ask scientists and philosophers to define life, and they will come up with a wide variety of answers. Why? Because life is mysterious and intangible, and organisms are inconceivably complex. Biologists can give detailed descriptions of cells and physical organisms, but they admit that the more the layers of complexity are uncovered, the more it becomes obvious how little they understand. Biology cannot be a complete study of life because biologists do not even attempt to explain the nature of the mind, the sense of identity and consciousness. They only study organs, systems, tissues, cells, DNA, genomes, proteins, and so on. A late practitioner of yoga, Ian Cheverton, wrote, quote, "Some years back, I worked as a research chemist. Often I would transform chemical compounds, combining one with another to form completely new substances. But I never heard them complain. And of course, it is absurd to think that they could. And yet, Isn't it also absurd to think that these same compounds, when arranged in more complex combinations called human bodies, have somehow evolved the faculty to do just that? At what stage do these inert, unfeeling chemicals come alive, develop an awareness of their existence, and with that awareness attain the ability to cry in anguish at the imminence of their annihilation, death? The Hungarian biochemist Albert Szent-Györgyi, who won the Nobel Prize for Psychology and Medicine in 1937, wrote in his book, Biology Today, "In my search for the secret of life, I ended up with atoms and electrons, which have no life at all. Somewhere along the line, life has run through my fingers, so in my old age, I am now retracing my steps." Krishna Chandra Prabhu, would you like to read the next page?
Evolutionary biologists assume that since living organisms are made of molecules, life symptoms are exhibited when there is a suitable complex arrangement of molecules. This conception is not based on empiric evidence, but is an assumption derived from their worldview. Adhering to the philosophy of scientific materialism or reductionism, they assume that there is no existence beyond what they can perceive, and thus they conclude that mind, intelligence, personality, sense of identity, consciousness, and emotions are nothing more than products of the brain's intricate neurological activity. This is an assumption which cannot be proven or demonstrated, but is an inference derived from the theory of chemical evolution or abiogenesis. There are others who are convinced that life is essentially metaphysical. That is to say, more than a mere collection of molecules and thus beyond the domain of physics, chemistry, and biology. Stephen Meyer, who received his PhD in the philosophy of science from Cambridge University, said in a recent dialogue with Perry Marshall, the author of Evolution 2.0, there is a growing openness in evolutionary biology to alternative approaches. Rarely has there been such a disparity between the popular perception of neo-Darwinism and the actual standing in the peer-reviewed scientific literature. World-class biologists openly express doubt about the creative power of mutation /natural selection. And yet, when neo-Darwinism is presented to the public, it is said to be beyond doubt. There are very few defenders of the theory in the technical literature. Even as far back as the 1980s, Stephen Jay Gould said that neo-Darwinism is dead except in a textbook orthodoxy. The late Stephen Jay Gould was a prominent evolutionary paleontologist and professor at Harvard University. Classical Darwinian theory was revised when it was integrated with Gregor Mendel's theory of genetics, and this synthesis became known as neo-Darwinism. The idea of random genetic mutation was added to natural selection as a force driving evolution. Dr. Mayer points out that although Darwinian evolution is presented in schools and in the media as a fact only contested by irrational fanatics, this narrative is being strongly challenged by many prominent scientists and philosophers. Dr. David Berlinski, mathematician and writer, while in conversation with Peter Robinson, whose Uncommon Knowledge is available on YouTube, said, "There are many mathematicians and physicists who don't even regard Darwin's theory as a genuine scientific theory. Look at the history of physics. Newton saw that the planets are being attracted to the sun by an inverse square force. Then he showed that if you made that assumption, the result would be orbits that exactly conform to what is observed. There is nothing like that in Darwinian theory. From the point of view of a serious scientist without that kind of demonstration, one would have no idea if the theory works or not. In the serious sciences, general relativity or quantum mechanics, a scientist can program a computer with the equations and ask, what are the consequences? And can actually see the consequences emerge in a simulation. We can't do any of this in biology. That should prompt a reasonable person to ask, why not? Why can't an evolutionary scientist take natural selection and random variation and program a computer to see the unfolding of an evolutionary process? If Darwin's theory is not much of a scientific theory, then what is it? With the decline of religious faith, which is a fact in the Western world, there is a hunger for a creation story. And what is a better creation story for an atheist than Darwin's theory?
Hare Krishna, Bhavatrini, Nandapatni, my obeisances to you.
Hare Krishna, Dandavad.
Yes, I explained a little bit earlier that Rupanuga Prabhu has been raving about this new book by our godbrother Purnaprajna Prabhu, which Rupanuga Prabhu said should be sent to me. And he sent me a soft copy, and I asked whoever was present when we started if they had any objections to reading a book challenging Darwin. It's entitled, I believe it's entitled Beyond Darwin. And then Risangi was inspired to state and to remind us that Srila Prabhupada told Rameshwar Prabhu that $10,000 should be given every month from Srila Prabhupada's BBT to promote the preaching of the Bhaktivedanta Institute. This was so important. And Prabhupada said if for some reason the BBT cannot do that, he would personally give those funds from his own means. So anyway, you weren't there at the time. I asked, would anyone object to reading this book? I know I have a better chance of reading it if I'm in your company, because that's where I do most of my reading. And nobody,
you know what Rameshwar said? Prabhupada, we can do that. Actually, we can give them $20,000 a month if you like. There's so much money coming in from books.
Wow.
So much money. Oh my God. And yeah, they offered. I don't know whatever really happened though, of course, but I read that. Jai Haribol Nandapatni.
Haribol, Guru.
Haribol. I'm walking at the
Haribol.
beach.
Haribol.
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 Bhavatrini.
So
I
I'm
like this reading. I like it. Can we continue? Does anybody object?
I want to continue, and as soon as we're done tonight, I'm putting this in the Prabhupada Disciples, God Brothers and God Sisters group, because I'm back on Facebook again.
Whoa.
But
Yay!
in
You
a
must behave.
in a
You
very
must behave.
sorry.
You must behave now, okay? You have to behave and observe the guidelines, okay?
Yes, I will.
Thank you very much.
I have to, otherwise I won't be on Facebook. I'll be kicked off
I know. No, I know we don't want that.
reading, so that all of our God Brothers and God Sisters can listen to this tomorrow. Okay?
Yay.
Thank you. So now we're at a historical overview. Would you continue, Bhavatrini, please?
Okay. There are no emotionally charged controversies about the major theories of physics: Newtonian laws of motion, Maxwell's theory of electromagnetism, the theories of general and special relativity and quantum theory. And there are no hotly debated controversies in chemistry, but there are controversies regarding the nature of life and life's origin that generate anger, ridicule, and defamation, just as much as debates about abortion, immigration, and the Second Amendment right to bear arms. To understand something about the universe, ask a cosmologist, to understand something about disease. You're moving it. To understand something about disease and their cures, consult a doctor. To understand something about molecular bonding, ask the chemist. To understand the economy, ask an economist. But for an understanding of life, people in all fields have something to say. Long ago, the questions, what is life and where did we come from, were considered to be within the domain of philosophers, religious leaders, and mystics. But now for many people, that has changed. And that change began with Darwin's publication of On the Origin of Species in 1859. Excuse me. In Europe, before the Renaissance, the Vatican dictated society's understanding of ourselves and the universe and would tolerate the findings of scientists only as long as they didn't conflict with the religious dogma. Then came Copernicus, who in the early 1500s became convinced that the Earth was not the center of the solar system, but like the other planets, revolved around the sun. Although this conflicted with church dogma, it was tolerated in the hopes that it would eventually prove false. Then came the Renaissance and the beginning of the scientific revolution in Italy. Still, the findings of scientists needed to have the approval of the powerful Vatican. The Vatican remained tolerant of scientific findings until the late 1500s with the emergence of the Protestant Reformation. In response to Protestant criticisms, the Vatican ruled that anyone who contradicted Catholic doctrine was a heretic. Is that two?
No, I was just going to say it would be good if when you're reading, I don't know when Nirhari Prabhu will be stopping his conversation in the background, but
you can hear him because he's
Yeah.
outside. He's not even in the house with me.
Oh,
Sorry.
okay.
Okay. I will. So next time, if I
Finish the page.
Oh, finish the page.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me tell him he's too loud. Prabhu. You're so loud they can hear you in here. Yeah. So, okay.
Galileo.
Okay. All right. I'm reading without glasses, and when I make it wider, then I have to move it. So where are we? Galileo's championing of heliocentric solar system was controversial during the lifetime when most astronomers subscribed to geocentric models. The matter was investigated by the Roman Inquisition in 1615, which concluded that his heliocentric view was foolish and absurd in philosophy and formally heretical, since it explicitly contradicts in many places the sense of Holy Scripture. Galileo was tried by the Inquisition, found vehemently suspect of heresy, and forced to recant under threat of torture and death. He spent the rest of his life under house arrest. The 16th century.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Finish and I'll ask a question. Go ahead.
Okay.
Sorry.
The 16th century philosopher and former Catholic priest, Giordano Bruno, was burned at the stake for a stubborn adherence to his then unorthodox beliefs, including the ideas that the universe is infinite and that other solar systems exist. Bruno's adventures in free thought ended when the Roman Inquisition declared him an impenitent, pertinacious an obstinate heretic. In 1600, the inquisitors stripped Bruno naked, bound his tongue, and burned him alive. In England, science flourished in what is called the Age of Enlightenment in the 18th century, with Isaac Newton and others who felt that the laws of the universe were the laws of God, and that God had given man the ability to understand them. Newton wrote, "This most beautiful system of the sun, planets, and comets could only proceed from the counsel and dominion of an intelligent and powerful being." Johannes Kepler wrote, "Geometry is unique and eternal, a reflection of the mind of God. That men are able to participate in it is one of the reasons why man is an image of God." Galileo, Faraday, Boyle, Pasteur, and Maxwell were among the other founding fathers of science who believed that the study of nature was the study of God's work.
Thank you. Nanda Patni, please.
I have a question, if I could. So, is it clear to you why the Catholic Church insisted that to think anything other than the mix of chemicals? I mean, I'm confused. Who considered that if there's a being involved is heretical? The Romans did, and they burned people at stake for having that conception, right? Anybody get that?
I didn't get that. They were burning people at the stake for disagreeing with what it said in the Bible.
Yeah.
Okay. So,
which was basically Genesis, and the 7 days of creation, and the Lord said, "Let there be light," and all of that's in the Old Testament. So I
it
guess
all came from the word. It all came from sound, like the Bhagavatam.
Yeah.
I mean, we know that. I'm just trying to figure out who is against it. There are all these scientists, right? These atheistic scientists.
Yeah, I mean, they considered it, heresy to not stick to the letter of the law, as it were. But at the end of these paragraphs, he's explaining that there was a kind of a flavor where the scientists could explore, but they all said that, all these great explorations were, under the umbrella of God's magnificence.
Very interesting. I'm gonna capture this. Thank you for that. I'll keep listening.
Nirhari, are you there now, Prabhu? I'm just listening and I'm waiting. Okay, if Nirhari's not there, then please continue, Nanda Patni. I want to try to finish as much of the book as possible.
Page 4. All right.
It's not there.
Then came science's biggest challenge to Christian dogma. Get that one out. Then came science's biggest challenge to Christian dogma, Darwin's theory of evolution, which suggested that man was not made in the image of God, but had evolved by the unguided process, which he called natural selection over a long period of time from primitive life forms. He hypothesized that there was a tree of life that described how all forms of life had a common descent from the first living cell. This was a time when science and religion coexisted, with neither denigrating the other. And so Darwin was afraid that his theory might change that. Darwin fully understood, and at times agonized over, the threat that his work might pose over traditional religious belief. For at least during his early years, he professed a belief in God. In an 1860 letter to American botanist Asa Gray, Darwin wrote, quote, "I had no intention to write atheistically," end quote. but later on admitted, quote, "I cannot see as plainly as others do any evidence of design and beneficence, for on all sides of us, there seems to be too much misery in the world." Thus, we see how Darwin's faith in God weakened over time and perhaps even disappeared. During his voyage on the HMS Beagle, while in a Brazilian rainforest, Darwin had been struck by its beauty, giving him an overwhelming sense of awe, as if comprehending that he was part of something grand and beyond the purview of observation. However, near the end of his life, Darwin wrote in his autobiography, while reflecting on that sense of awe on the Brazilian rainforest, that now not even the grandest scene in nature would inspire such a view. Why? He explained that he no longer saw evidence of exquisite design and purpose in nature after formulating his law of natural selection. And although Darwin respectfully wanted to avoid confrontation, Thomas Henry Huxley became his ardent admirer and forcefully propagated his teachings so that he became known as Darwin's bulldog. Huxley wrote in a letter to Darwin in 1859, "I've finished your book yesterday, and as for your doctrines, I'm prepared to go to the stake if requisite. I trust you will not allow yourself to be in any way disgusted or annoyed by the considerable abuse and misrepresentation which, unless I greatly mistake, is in store for you. And as for the curs that will yelp and bark, I'm sharpening up my beak and claws in readiness." I'm not quite sure how much to read.
Just finish the page.
Okay.
Please.
There was a new breed of scientists and philosophers eager to take advantage of Darwin's theory to counter dogmatic church doctrine, which they saw as misrepresenting reality. Richard Dawkins, Dawkins, the celebrated atheist, famously said, although atheism might have been logically tenable before Darwin, Darwin made it possible to be an intellectually fulfilled atheist. Darwin's theory of evolution gave a new breed of scientists hope for an explanation of life's origin based on empirical evidence. The Darwinian theory of biological evolution theorizes that random variation, natural selection, enabled all the species of life that we see today to evolve from the first primitive cells. It's a challenge to the theist understanding that all forms of life were divinely created. And although Darwin hardly considered the origin of life, it became obvious that it was necessary to prove that life randomly arose from molecules to support his theory. Thus, a separate study known as chemical evolution or abiogenesis, which supposes that the first living cell randomly formed from simple molecules, became of paramount importance. This book will primarily deal with abiogenesis because without proof that the first living cell formed by an unguided process that is understandable by the laws of chemistry, the theory of biological evolution would have no scientific basis. It's something like how if a mistake is made in the beginning of one's calculations, all the subsequent calculations will inevitably lead to an erroneous conclusion. So according to Wikipedia, abiogenesis, or informally the origin of life, is the natural process by which life has arisen from non-living matter, such as simple organic compounds. And while details of this process are still unknown, the prevailing scientific hypothesis is that the transition from the non-living to living entities was not a single event, but an evolutionary process of increasing complexity that involved molecular self-replication, self-assembly, catalysts, and the emergence of cell membranes. And although the occurrence of abiogenesis is uncontroversial among scientists, its possible mechanisms have never been demonstrated.
Nirhari Prabhu, are you available now to read?
Yes, I was trying to, it said the host had muted me before. I was touching all the buttons. And can you hear me now?
Because you were speaking while Nandapatni was reading and it was interfering with her.
Oh, when was that? Right now?
Just a few minutes ago.
And we can hear you now. That's great.
I'm sorry. Yeah, this is all this that is very interesting. If you want to hear, my major was chemical engineering, and so I always search. What's the origin? For me, it was always it got to exist. I want to know and. So anyhow, the current theories, they always were changing. All parents' theory was, kind of evolution, but due to, cataclysmic events, it will cause such a thing. But it was never clear. It's always speculated. So I keep reading the theory.
Wait, can I just say something? That was so interesting, though, about how it developed from the single cell to more and more complexity to have a cell membrane. Like that's their theory, is that this single cell evolved all of this complexity just like that, with no design, no intelligence, just haphazardly.
Right.
Like insanity.
And yes, and my question was always where are the chemicals coming from? Okay, you said there is a mass of protoplasmic crud, like our godbrother called it. The scientists who called it so. But so the other day I saw a cartoon. It was God is somebody's trying to create something, and God tells him, okay, get your own pile of mud.
I like that. Get your own pile of mud.
Yeah, create your own. We're coming from clay or whatever. This inert matter. So get your own, and then see if you can get life. So, and the other thing it reminded me of Bhaktisiddhanta is to those who have, they don't want God. God. For the atheist, God is nowhere, and for the devotee, God is everywhere. So. And then speaking to a family member who had awards. I mean, it's just like they dedicated a whole college to him and all that. Then when I went to see him, he said, "Well, answer me this. Is either God is cruel or it doesn't exist." All this is because like here, this is that Darwin seeing all this, the misery of the world, like that. I mean. It cannot be that. So we want to always, when we're like teenagers, whenever there is something wrong, you blame your parents. Otherwise, you just don't tell me what to do. And so, this, how would love exist if we have no choice?
Thank you. Awesome. Let's read more. This is so cool, right?
Yeah.
Appreciating it.
Okay. So,
will you be reading Nirhari Prabhu?
Sure. Yeah. Sorry. The theory of spontaneous generation.
No. Nandapatni finished on this last paragraph, so it's the last sentence.
Well, the last sentence. Okay, I don't know why I have this thing right on top of it.
I'm going to be presenting this reading because it's a brand new book by our godbrother Purnaprajna Prabhu. I am presenting this reading to all the 904 Prabhupada disciples tomorrow.
Amazing. At the bottom of my screen, I have page 5 of 48, and it's covering over the less
glitches we can have here, the nicer of a reading it will be for everyone to hear.
So where do I start?
The last sentence. The last sentence points out.
Okay, let me see.
Can you see that, Nirhari, or is it cut off?
No, it's just that at the bottom of the page, later the idea, the last, where are you? Let's see. The theory of spontaneous generation, that's what you're reading. And
it's the paragraph above the theory of spontaneous generation.
oh, okay, all right. The statement that the occurrence of abiogenesis is uncontroversial among scientists.
No. It's the last sentence points out, described in detail.
Okay, indeed, they point out that evidence shows that the theory of abiogenesis.
I don't understand what you're reading. I'll just.
The last sentence start from the top. I mean,
I'm trying to, this whole book is 48 pages long. I'm trying to complete it tonight, if it's possible. I don't know.
So it's just the paragraph. The last sentence points out.
What? Sorry.
It begins with the last sentence points out.
Okay. All right. I got it. I see it now. Sorry, my apologies. The last sentence points out what is described in detail in the first chapter of this book. Although mainstream evolutionary scientists publicly claim that there is no reasonable explanation for the existence of life other than their theory of abiogenesis, they have failed to even theoretically understand the steps involved to go from inorganic molecules to the formation of a living cell. And so what to speak of demonstrating these steps in the laboratory. The statement, quote, the occurrence of abiogenesis is uncontroversial among scientists, unquote, is misleading because there are many highly accomplished scientists who seriously doubt that life could have randomly arisen from chemicals by an unguided process. Indeed, they point out that the evidence shows that the theory of abiogenesis is nothing more than a molecular fairy tale. Some of the scientists will speak out in this first chapter. So I'll go on reading.
Reading the whole, each devotee, one page.
Okay. The theory of the spontaneous generation. The idea that life evolves from chemicals, which was previously known as spontaneous generation, is not new, although it was not the predominating view in ancient times, especially in the East. An ancient Sanskrit text dealing with logic provides this example of a logical fallacy. The villagers in India often believed that scorpions were generated from piles of rice after the harvest. The rice was piled up, and after some time, scorpions were seen to emerge. And so the villagers thought that they were spontaneously generated from the rice. However, the learned persons knew that scorpions had laid their eggs in the piles of rice, so that in due course of time, baby scorpions had emerged. Aristotle had believed that under the proper conditions, worms, fleas, and mice could spring to life spontaneously from moist earth. In the 7th century,
like the image.
Oh my God. Proponents of the theory cited how frogs seem to appear along the muddy banks of the Nile River in Egypt during the annual flooding. Others observed that mice appear among grain stored in barns with thatched roofs. When the roof leaked and the grain molded, mice appeared. Later, the Italian physician Francisco Redi, 1626-1697, performed an experiment in 1668 that was one of the first to refute the idea that maggots, the larvae of flies, spontaneously generate on meat left up in the open air. Redi left meat in 2 containers open to the air, 2 that they were covered with gauze and 2 that were tightly sealed. Maggots developed in uncovered jars, but no maggots appear in either gauze covered or tightly sealed jars. And so he concluded that maggots could only form when flies were allowed to lay eggs in the meat, and that the maggots were the offspring of flies, not the product of spontaneous generation. The debate over spontaneous generation continued well into the 19th century, with scientists serving as proponents of both sides. To settle the debate, the Paris Academy of Sciences offered a prize for resolution of the problem. Louis Pasteur, a prominent French chemist who had been studying microbial fermentation, accepted the challenge. Pasteur's set of experiments irrefutably disproved the theory of spontaneous generation and earned him the prestigious Alumberg Prize from the Paris Academy of Sciences in 1862. In a subsequent lecture in 1864, Pasteur articulated omne vivum ex vivo. Life comes from life. I love it. That's right. It's vivo is life. In Latin, vivum, life comes from life. Looking back, it is somewhat humorous to think about how people had believed that insects or animals could somehow emerge from damp earth and decomposing meat. And it is particularly experienced that wherever one looks, it is seen that living beings are produced from other living beings. And yet Aristotle's hypothesis has been replaced by another spontaneous generation hypothesis, one that required billions of years to go from the molecules of the universe to cells, and then via random mutation, natural selection, from cells to the variety of organisms seen today. This version, which postulates chance happenings, eventually leading to the phenomena of life, is biology's theory of evolution. I can't read any more because there's something in front of it. Okay.
Are you finished walking?
Yeah, now I'm driving. When I stop, I'll be happy to read.
Okay. Thank you. Although Charles Darwin is generally credited with formulating the theory of evolution, it is interesting to note that his grandfather, Erasmus Darwin, physician, poet, and botanist, wrote of a materialistic theory of evolution in his poems. Previously, Jean-Baptiste Lamarck, 1744 to 1829, proposed a theory of the transmutation of species. Alfred Russel Wallace was a contemporary and associate of Darwin, who also proposed the theory of evolution by natural selection. But unlike Darwin, he was afraid to make his views widely known. As a naturalist, Charles Darwin studied the various species and fossils he saw during his travels, and when he had published On the Origin of Species in 1859, he hardly mentioned the origin of life. At that time, microscopes were primitive, and in fact, Darwin had made his own. The understanding of the cell at that time was formulated by Theodore Schwann, who in 1840 wrote, quote, "Cells form by free cell formation, similar to the formation of crystals, spontaneous generation," unquote. The correct understanding of cell formation by division was later on enunciated by Rudolf Virchow, who is known as the father of modern pathology. He said, "Omnis cellula e cellula," quote, "all cells only arise from pre-existing cells," unquote. This truth has not been disproven up to the present time. Darwin didn't personally investigate the nature of a living cell, but he commended G.H. Lewis's views, as expressed in an article in the November 1st, 1868 issue of Fortnightly Review. There, Mr. Lewis said that the most recent investigations had led to the definition of a cell as being, quote, "a nucleus surrounded by protoplasm," unquote. He said about the nucleus that, quote, "exaggerated importance has been attributed to it, and mysterious powers have been ascribed to it," unquote. About the cell's membrane, he wrote, quote, "that which makes the cell a closed sac is no longer to be regarded as a necessary constituent, but only as an accessory," unquote. Baron Vlardingerbroek, an associate professor of education at the American University of Beirut, wrote, "Thomas Huxley coined the term abiogenesis, or a natural process by which life had arisen from non-living matter to distance the origin of life from what was left of spontaneous generation theory. In an 1870 article, he wrote, quote, "If it were given to me to look beyond the abyss of geologically recorded time to the still more remote period when the earth was passing through physical and chemical conditions, which it can no more see again than a man can recall his infancy, I should expect to be a witness of the evolution of living protoplasm from not living matter," unquote. Later in life, Darwin favored the view that life could appear by natural processes from simple inorganic compounds, but was reluctant to discuss this issue because of his recognition that at the time it was not possible to undertake an experimental study to confirm this. In the third edition of On the Origin of Species, he wrote, quote, "It is no valid objection that science as yet throws no light on the far higher problem of the origin of life," unquote. In a letter to his close friend, Joseph Dalton, Darwin wrote, quote, "It is mere rubbish thinking at present of origin of life. One might as well think of the origin of matter," unquote. And yet, 7 years later, in a letter to the same person, Darwin wrote, quote, "It is often said that all the conditions for the first production of a living being are now present, which could have ever been present. But if, and oh, what a big if, we could conceive in some warm little pond with all sorts of ammonia and phosphoric acids, along with light, heat, and electricity, that a protein compound was chemically formed, it would be ready to undergo still more complex changes," unquote. The scientific method is a method of procedure that has characterized natural science since the 17th century, consisting of systematic observation leading to the formulation of a hypothesis and then experiment or demonstration to verify it. Did Darwin and his contemporaries observe the formation of a living cell from molecules? No, they did not. And yet, without observation, Darwin formulated his hypothesis or theory, and others jumped on the bandwagon. Thus, it must be concluded that by definition, Darwin's theory of evolution, at least pertaining to the origin of life, is not a scientific theory at all, but mere conjecture. Krishna Chandra Prabhu.
Can I say a little something? Last night I was hearing Prabhupada's lecture in Bhagavad Gita 68, Los Angeles, and he talks about evolution, and that we all began as aquatics because at the beginning the universe is all flooded at points, at times, so it's 900,000 species. He quotes the verse, 900,000, 2 million. He goes from aquatics to insects, to birds, to trees, to birds, and then beasts. And then he said beasts with two hands, like gorilla, Prabhupada says. But he calls it evolution. That's the evolution.
Right, thank you.
Should I go on?
Please, Prabhu.
Okay. Scientists have been unable to construct a living cell from scratch. The complex structure of a living cell was unknown in Darwin's day, and at the time, ascribing life to coincidences and natural causes was thought by early evolutionists to be convincing enough. And so they concerned themselves with fossil records in search for evidence of biological evolution. At that time, it was not even known that a cell contains the complex molecules DNA and RNA, and even proteins were only vaguely understood. The structure of proteins was discovered by Linus Pauling in the 1950s, and this led to the discovery of the structure of DNA soon thereafter. The idea that the first cell evolved from molecules in a primordial soup was discovered most extensively by the Russian scientist A.I. Oparin. And in the 1920s, it is still the most widely held theory of abiogenesis among evolutionists. Then the most famous origin of life experiment was completed in 1953 by Stanley Miller, who at the time was a graduate student at the University of Chicago working under Dr. Urey. This is the same Stanley Miller that was mentioned in the beginning of this chapter. The Miller-Urey experiments involved filling a sealed glass apparatus with methane, ammonia, and hydrogen gases, representing what they thought composed the early atmosphere, and water vapor to simulate the ocean. Next, they used a spark discharge device to strike the gases in the flask, which with simulated lightning, while a heating coil kept the water boiling. Within a few days, the water and gas mixture produced a reddish stain on the sides of the flask. After analyzing the substances that had been formed, they found several types of amino acids. Urey and Miller assumed that these results were significant because amino acids are the building blocks of proteins, the basic structure of all life. The press widely heralded Miller's experiments as proving that the origin of life could have occurred on the early Earth under natural conditions. Although the pundits speculated that scientists like Mary Shelley's Dr. Frankenstein would shortly conjure up living organisms in their laboratories and thereby demonstrate in detail how the origin of life unfolded, it hasn't worked out that way. In fact, almost 40 years after his original experiment, Stanley Miller told Dr. Jerry Bergman that solving the riddle of origin of life has turned out to be more difficult than he or anyone else had envisioned. Today, Miller's experiment is disregarded by most evolution scientists, although it is still featured in all the high school textbooks. Miller had created ideal conditions for forming amino acids, assuming that this approximated the conditions of the early Earth. However, more recent studies have concluded that the conditions of the early Earth were not conducive for the formation of amino acids. In the February 1998 issue of the famous evolution science journal Earth, this statement appears in an article entitled Life's Crucible. Geologists now think that the primordial atmosphere consisted mainly of carbon dioxide and nitrogen, gases that are less reactive than those used in the 1953 experiment. Besides this, at the end of Miller's experiment, many organic acids have been formed with characteristics detrimental to the structure and function of living things. If the amino acids had not been isolated, their destruction or transformation into different compounds through chemical reactions would have been unavoidable. Moreover, many right-handed amino acids were formed at the end of Miller's experiment. The existence of these amino acids refuted the theory of abiogenesis even within its own terms, because right-handed amino acids cannot function in the composition of living organisms. All these facts point to one firm truth. It cannot be claimed that Miller's experiment proved significant evidence that living cells had formed by chance under the primordial Earth-like conditions. The experiment was nothing more than a controlled laboratory experiment to synthesize amino acids.
Department, please.
Okay, I'm just going to add that I think it was in 1984, my then Krishna partner and I interviewed Linus Pauling because he was a vegetarian and favorable to Krishna consciousness. So anyway, when Darwin and others early on were enthusiastic, thinking that they were solving the mystery of the origin of life, they didn't understand the incredible complexity of even the simplest cell. Even in the 1950s, Miller didn't know the extent of the cell's complexity. And so he made the immense extrapolation of the production of some amino acids to the possible formation of a living cell. This kind of extrapolation is simply an exercise of the imagination outside the scientific method. There is a clear distinction between molecules reacting naturally on a prebiotic early Earth, in a cave or in a pond, and the synthesizing of molecules by biochemists in a laboratory. The theory of abiogenesis states that the first living cells had assembled by an unguided process according to natural laws. Urey and Miller attempted to create what they thought might be an early Earth atmosphere and then wait to see the results. Since that time, during the last 2/3 of a century, there has been no further demonstration of how the building blocks of living cells might have naturally formed. Simply synthesizing some building blocks is an insignificant step towards synthesizing a living cell in a laboratory. Suppose someone made a pile of bricks. It doesn't mean that he will be recognized as an architect or an engineer that designs a building and then uses bricks to construct it. How does creating some building blocks in the laboratory support the theory that they somehow randomly combine to form even the simplest cell? Does manufacturing bricks prove that they'll somehow self-assemble to become an Empire State Building? And besides being a pile of bricks, a building must have wiring for electricity, plumbing, and arrangement for heating and air conditioning, elevators, and so on. Is the information required for the manufacture of these systems contained in the bricks? As we shall see, even the simplest living cells are far more complex than any building or even city. And yet evolutionary scientists want to convince us that they're randomly formed billions of years ago. Historians of science say that the modern era of experimental research in the origin of life began in a basement laboratory in the chemistry department at the University of Chicago in 1953 with Harold Urey, the Nobel laureate in chemistry, and Stanley Miller, then a graduate student. Their synthesizing of amino acids could be accepted as a first step, but just imagine the millions of steps it would take to go on from the production of amino acids in a laboratory to the construction of a living cell. These steps cannot even be imagined. And so what to speak of synthesized, even by the leading microbiologists or synthetic chemists? Dr. James Tour is one of the world's foremost synthetic chemists and a cutting-edge researcher in nanotechnology. And he's authored 680 scientific publications and holds more than 120 patents. And in 2014, Thomson Reuters named him one of the world's most influential scientific minds. And in 2018, Clarivate Analytics recognized him as one of the world's most highly cited researchers. Dr. Tour speaks candidly about abiogenesis. He insists that only a synthetic chemist like himself has the right to critique those who speak about the origin of life from molecules. The theory of abiogenesis predates biology, and so it is the synthetic chemist who assembles molecules for a living, and not the biologist that can understand how molecules combine, both in a laboratory and in nature. Working in nanotechnology, Dr. Tour knows best under what conditions simple molecules combine to form more complex molecules. And he speaks with authority and invites anyone to correct him if there's a mistake in his statements. Sections of Dr. Tour's public talks, all of which are within the last few years and are available on YouTube, are paraphrased here.
Thank you. Baba Trini, are you available?
Yes, she's coming right here.
I don't have glasses on. Okay. The cell is an amazing machine and not just a blob of protoplasm. The question of the origin of life becomes harder to solve every year because of the complexity of the cell. In the cell, there are microbules that are formed to move matter from one place to another. After moving matter, the microtubules break down and then assemble somewhere else. The cell is an amazing factory, and this is what we must make if we want to talk about the origin of life. Nobody has done this, nobody. Without a biologically derived entity, a researcher, acting upon them, molecules have never been shown to evolve toward life. Molecules have no idea of moving toward life. It is in organisms that care about life and want to keep life going. Nobody has ever seen molecules assemble toward life without a biological entity, the biochemist, working on them. Molecules never move toward a non-regular assembly. A regular assembly is like A, or AB. But you must have a non-regular assembly to have DNA. Note, Dr. Tour is pointing out that there is a digital coding in the spine of the DNA molecule. According to the arrangement of base pairs of nucleotides, a great variety of proteins are manufactured, and this coding is not the kind of regular assembly found in snowflakes or ripples in a pond, but is a non-regular or specified assembly of characters, much like that which constitutes computer code. This will be discussed in more detail later in this chapter. I have asked my associates if there are any examples of a non-regular assembly of molecules occurring without a biological entity acting upon them, and they send me papers describing chemists assembling molecules. But these involve the researcher, a biological entity. You moved it, Mike. Huh?
When you are in the laboratory,
When it's
you have a target.
I don't see it. When you are in the laboratory.
It's
So
about the sixth line down on the page.
Oh, when you are in the laboratory, you have a target, what you want to accomplish. Molecules don't have a target. They have no brain. That is what scientists do. Purchase some chemicals, generally in high purity, from a chemical company. Mix those chemicals together in water in high concentration or in a specific order under some set of carefully devised conditions in a modern laboratory. Obtain a mixture of compounds that have a resemblance to one of or more of the basic 4 classes of chemicals needed for life: carbohydrates, nucleic acids, amino acids, or lipids. Publish a paper making bold assertions about the origin of life from these functionless, crude mixtures of stereochemically scrambled intermediates, much like Miller did in 1952. Engage with the ever gullible press to dial up the knob of unjustified extrapolations. Watch the mesmerized layperson exclaim, "You see, scientists understand how life formed." Encourage a generation of science textbooks writers to make colorful, deceptive cartoons of raw chemicals assembling into cells, which then emerge as slithering creatures from a prehistoric pond. Nothing has changed since the Miller experiment in 1952, although since that time, We've been given satellite interconnectivity, space travel, the internet, and so many other advances in the area of origin of life. Evolutionary scientists are still struggling to create the building blocks of life in their laboratories.
Are you there in your hurry to read the next page, please?
Yeah, I'm here. What is really, oh, you moved it up. Okay. What is really going on in the laboratories of today's biochemists? Are the claims made by these scientists and the articles in respected journals accurate, or are they misleading? Here is an example. The website nature.com published an article on March 24, 2016, entitled Minimal, unquote, Cell raises stakes in race to harness synthetic life. The article began, quote, genomics entrepreneur Craig Venter has created a synthetic cell that contains the smallest genome of any known independent organism, unquote. While giving a talk on his work in 2019, Craig Venter said, "We are here today to announce the first synthetic cell, a cell made by starting with the digital code in the computer, building the chromosome from 4 bottles of chemicals, assembling that chromosome in yeast, transplanting it into a recipient bacteria cell, and transforming that cell into a new bacterial species," unquote. Has Craig Venter created life? Has he created a cell? While giving a talk in 2019, Dr. James Tour gave his explanation of what Craig Venter has done. He said in 2010, Craig Venter's team copied an existing bacterial genome and transplanted it into a cell. By a Corvette, take out the computer control box and take it into my clean room at the university and copy the chips and put the chips that I copied into the control box. And then I said, quote, "I built that Corvette," the car Corvette. Yeah. In 2016, Venter and his team did something similar, but removed all but 473 genes from a natural genome and transplanted it into another cell and claimed that he made a cell. He made a cell worse. In the cell, there are so many complexities. Nobody has ever made them, unquote. In a private correspondence, Dr. Tour explained that the 4 bottles of chemicals referred to by Craig Venter were nucleotides. Since they synthesized the genome and inserted it in a living cell, is his claim that he created a cell deceptive? Yes, it is deceptive because to, quote, create a living cell, unquote, one must start with non-living molecules and not a living bacteria. Molecular biologists construct that they call proto cells, unquote, in their laboratories, claiming that they are simplified replicas of cells, which could be similar to those that had formed on the early Earth. What Dr. James Tour has said about proto cells is paraphrased herein. A proto cell is a self-organized, endogenously, meaning from within, order, a spherical collection of lipids proposed as a stepping stone to the origin of life. A description of the procedure is too technical for this book, but in essence, what is done is that lipids are combined to form synthetic bilayer vesicles, which is what the cell's membrane is composed of. After doing this, a paper is published claiming that this is suggestive of an early form of life. Researchers have identified 40,000 kinds of lipids in a cell's membranes. But in every proto-cell experiment, they use only one type of lipid. And in a cell membrane, the outside lipids are different from the inside ones. No one understands how this could be assembled. No one. Besides this, there are other complex arrangements in a cell's membrane, such as the protein-controlled gateways that allow certain things to enter the cell and other things that are harmful not to enter because they would destroy it. Therefore, the proto cells made are not really proto cells at all. Dr. Tur insists that those who claim that life evolves from chemicals must show a step-by-step mechanism to support their hypothesis. Although evolutionary scientists claim that this mechanism is being progressively understood by the relentless research when pressed for details, they have not demonstrable mechanism at all.
Rasangi, are you free to read now?
Yeah. Yeah. Do we understand this, everybody?
Can I make a very quick comment there? Gaura?
Yeah.
Are you there?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, they're sort of, rattling on about all these complexities and manipulations of these chemicals and whatnot in the name of research. And yes, they do sort of accomplish various things. But the bottom line is that I think, they never created the chemicals that they're manipulating.
Mm-hmm.
It goes back to square one, doesn't it? That very simple argument that Prabhupada made. And also, the other point is that although they may manipulate all these things, they actually ostensibly do have imperfect senses and make mistakes. So although they have a theory, in the 1600s or the 21st century, and they could argue that they're evolving, but and they do want to extend life and all this stuff that's going on in Silicon Valley. They are just manipulating the elements at the end of the day.
They've made no progress.
So it's like, but at the beginning, I was just saying that, like the joke, God says, oh, get your own mud, get your own chemicals.
Mm-hmm.
I love it. That's helpful.
Then you can claim that you started it, that now you created something. And Prabhupada, the other joke that I like Prabhupada said is, everything is an accident, coincidence, except their PhD.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Nice.
Hey, Dr. Jerry Bergman, professor of biochemistry, has written, when Darwinists discuss missing links, they often imply that relatively few links are missing in what is a rather complex chain, which connects the putative chemical precursors to life, to all life forms existing today. The respected chemist and entomologist Anthony Standen, who asserted that scientists and their theories should be subjected to the same scrutiny and criticism that other professionals face. Oh, yes.
I'm making it bigger for you.
Very good, thank you. Noted that the term missing link is misleading because it suggests that only one link is missing, whereas it is more accurate to state that so many links are missing that it is not evident whether there was ever a chain. Wow. This assertion now has been well documented by many chemists and biologists. Scientists have not only been unable to find a single undisputed link that clearly connects two of the hundreds of major family groups, but they have not even been able to produce a plausible starting point for their hypothetical evolutionary chain. The first links, actually, the first hundreds of thousands or more links that are required to produce life are still missing. The origin of life is a science writer's dream that abounds with exotic scientists and exotic theories, which are never entirely abandoned or accepted, but merely go in and out of fashion.
Mm-hmm.
It's so heavy, right? And this is still all being taught in the schools as fact.
And that's what's supposed to be inspiring us to go into those schools and speak. That's what Prabhupada wants us to do. Please continue.
Yeah, go ahead. What? I'll continue. The major links in the molecules to man theory. I love that. Molecules to man theory. That must be bridged include A, evolution of simple molecules into complex molecules. B, evolution of complex molecules into simple organic molecules. And C, evolution of simple organic molecules into complex organic molecules. D, eventual evolution of complex organic molecules into DNA or similar information storage molecules. And E, eventually evolution into the first cells. This process requires multi-millions of links, all of which are either missing or controversial. Wow. Casey Luskin, a research scientist and attorney, has further explained the nature of perhaps the most important missing link. What he has written is paraphrased herein. Evolutionary scientists need to explain the origin of the genetic code in order to evolve to the DNA protein-based life that exists today. So we have to remember that. Well, where's your explanation of the genetic code? How do you explain the origin of the genetic code? We consider these scientists, right? And they can't. Okay. The ability to convert genetic information into proteins must have randomly evolved. However, the process of transcription and translation requires a large suite of proteins and molecular machines, which themselves are encoded by genetic information. Yikes. This poses a chicken and egg problem, where essential enzymes and molecular machines are needed to perform the very task that constructs them. To appreciate this problem, consider the origin of the first DVD and DVD player. DVDs are rich information, but without the machinery of a DVD player to read the disc, process its information, and convert it into a picture, the sound, the disc would be useless. Like, it's true. Oh my God. We used to have these little video things, but without the thing that puts in the machine, you can't play them, they're useless. So without the DVD player, the DVD has no function.
Right.
Just like the DVD analogy, genetic information can never be converted into proteins without the proper machinery. Yet in cells, the machines required for processing the genetic information in RNA or DNA are encoded by those same genetic molecules. They perform and direct the very task that builds them. Wow. This system cannot exist unless both the genetic information and transcription, translation, machinery are present at the same time, unless both speak the same language. Sounds
Thank you very much,
convincing.
That concludes our reading for this evening. We got 12 pages done. I'm eager to complete. I'm eager to read the book. I'm eager to complete the book because I'd like to go back to reading about Lord Chaitanya before Gaura Purnima comes. At this rate, it'll take us 2 more sessions, but maybe we could do it in one session next time. I'm not sure, but I'm sure Purnaprajna Prabhu will be very enthused to know that we're reading his book together. And we've made the first 12 pages available to the assembled Vaishnavas. We know this is very dear to Srila Prabhupada. Would anyone like to say what they think is the connection between Lord Chaitanya and what we've read tonight?
That takes a bit of thinking. Well, I guess if I have a go at it here, I mean, it goes back, I guess, to how we were guided by Prabhupada to think about these things. That in fact, as human beings, we're fallible and we have imperfect senses, and that Krishna consciousness is a revealed thing through the chanting and through this exploration and inquiry of approaching someone who, even if you don't have any faith, appears to have this exquisite knowledge, which is beyond the faulty senses. So that's how I would link it up, is that you have all these people that are pounding the hammer of science and are very proud of their genome and their coding and all the rest of it. And they do make sort of various modern advancements, but nobody has actually conquered over birth, old age, disease, and death. That's something that Prabhupada always brings up, and that they couldn't produce the elements by which they're doing their experiments. And so I would say that Lord Chaitanya's mercy is that he works through an exquisite representative to bring us a whole other kind of knowledge, which doesn't link one up to imperfect senses, but one's original spiritual self. Sorry, that was rather kind of roundabout.
I would just like to say that I think this is really helpful, because being raised in the West, in the scientific world, there's still a certain reverence for science and scientists, that they are brilliant, that they're actually creating things that are, benefiting human life. But we see that's not really true exactly. But so this is helping to debunk it and put them where they belong. Because it says, after all these years, Darwinism is just a theory. It was never scientifically proven, but we're being fed it in schools as fact. So I appreciate the opportunity to, in my own mind, bring them down a peg or two. Yeah.
For me,
Yes.
for me.
Yes, Hari Prabhu. We can't see you, but thank you for
Yeah, sorry.
Thank you for speaking. Yes.
Let me see. I can't. All right. But no, for me it was Sarva Karana Karanam. The actually Lord Chaitanya is Krishna himself. And in reading the first chapter of Chaitanya Charitamrita, I put it again the other day, and it describes who is Lord Nityananda. So I think this life fits really well, and there is not a theory, but the narrative is about, or the history of how this phenomenon of material nature is created. As we know, there's actually the basic soup of the thing is the parabioma, isn't it? Once a while, the cloud is created in the spiritual sky, and enters an expansion of Shankaracharya, Nityananda Prabhu, as Mahavishnu, and etc., etc. You know how it goes on. So there's several causes that you can go, and empirically will be like forever trying to count the sand, the grains, the atoms in this universe. But as Chaitanya says, there won't be an end. He said you might come to some end, but the glories of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu cannot be counted. At the same time, we are given measurements, the scientific, Vedic science. We were talking the other day to this man who, right on the corner, he was talking about Vedic science. We talked, so he's starting to realize, everything, including, because he was telling us about the cows. He really likes our cows, and he feeds them and like that. And so he said, there is somebody, a scientist here now, that is trying to prove how the cows, it can turn arid land into a very fertile one just by introducing the cows. And that there is this and that, so many, IMOs and, microorganisms in the cow saliva and the urine and the cow dung and the hooves, they aerate the soil, all like that. So Vedic science. But what's the origin of all this? Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Sri Nityananda Prabhu. So I think it's all linked, and I'm glad and then great. Like Rashangi was saying, I was, my thing was, like 5 planets in Virgo was always try to, scientifically or explain things. Now they had to make sense. They had to be practically demonstrated. Otherwise, they were a fantasy. So when I started reading Prabhupada, wow, it blew my mind. It was like, oh, now I come into the real science. And so this is great. I'm glad this will attract and pacify a lot of minds. I like to send this book to my cousin. It was voted the best neurosurgeon, but he thinks life begins in the brain, and the brain is the origin of everything. It's like they take it for granted that evolution is a fact. So this is great work. Haribol.
Thank you, Prabhu. Krishna Chandra, you had something to say, Prabhu?
Yes, thank you, Prabhu. The first thing when you asked the question that popped in my mind is, of course, Srila Prabhupada, he came to bring the message of Mahaprabhu. And in this Pranam mantra, it's the second part is Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvisesha Shunyavadi Praschatya Deshatarine. And part of that is delivering the Western countries which are filled with impersonalism and voidism. And what is voidism? It's this message by the scientists such as Darwin, who have come up with this theory that now that we see in this book, we see that it really doesn't make sense whatsoever.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to point out the hypocrisy, the huge scam that the modern scientists, the wool that they're pulling over everyone's eyes, and the hypocrisy, because I've done speaking in high schools, colleges, and universities over the years, and I've noticed that there is a concerted effort by atheists who insist that Darwinism must be a part of the curriculum, but they say religion, that's something you should teach at home. That's something only meant to be done, with mommy and daddy. But in university, we accept Charles Darwin as gospel. Total bunk. Total nonsense. Prabhupada was so much against this. This little book, Life Comes from Life. Prabhupada is he's going for the jugular on the scientists. He's not letting them off. Rasangi, she's very gentle. God sister, she's saying very nicely, bring them down a couple of notches. But Prabhupada wanted to destroy them. Prabhupada said one of the main purpose for creating the temple of Vedic Planetarium, which we've spent over $85 million, God bless, Krishna bless Ambarish Prabhu and all of his donors. The main reason was to destroy atheism in the form of mechanistic science, like what we're reading about right now, and communism. So how important this book is, and I hope it will be distributed en masse. I hope that Purnaprajna Prabhu will have to print tens of hundreds of thousands of this book to be disseminated widely. And I'm inspired to want to go back out and preach. I don't know, because of the whole COVID ordeal, when they'll let us back into the classrooms. But boy, do they ever need to hear how, I made the mistake in the last class I think I gave. I showed, as I do a little thing called Hinduism 101, in which, I explain the basis of Krishna consciousness. I just use the word Hinduism as a way to get in the door, because if I say Krishna consciousness 101, they're not going to really know what I'm talking about. So I go in under the veneer of Hinduism and begin explaining. There's no such, the term does not even exist in those scriptures of the Vedic culture. And then I was explaining, the origins of the universe from the Vedic perspective. And actually, Druta Karma Prabhu warned me, and I should have listened to his warning. What is this saying? Hindsight is 20/20. And when I took him on a tour in the Toronto area to speak at different universities, after I was hearing him, because his point was that a knowledge filter exists within the scientific community, and they only want you to speak on what they pay you to speak about. And if you speak about anything that challenges, just like the whole vaccine thing, as soon as you talk about anything outside of, what modern science wants you to talk about, then you're out of there. You've lost your tenure, you've lost your job, same thing repeated. So I said, wow, Drita Karma, I'm so fired up hearing your talks. I can hardly wait to speak in my next high school or college. And he said, well, Gaura, you've been doing pretty good up till now. Maybe you should just continue to do things as you've always done. I said, no. I want to really get into it a lot more. And so in my 80 slides that I usually present, I presented 2 slides, one stating, this is my mindset of an atheist, that everything started from a chemical and that evolved into a more complex form, and now we have that everything came from nothing and then nothing became something. And then it said, makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? And when I showed that slide to all the students, they went, ha ha ha, they just laughed at it. And then I showed a slide of Charles Darwin with his big forehead. He's got a big forehead and his beard. I think I got this photo from the BTG. And then from his behind is a monkey tail. And the title of the slide was, is Darwin making a monkey out of you? And originally I wanted to present that as a poster for Sadaputa Prabhu for some classes that I organized for him at different universities. And I should have taken his advice too, because he said, no, that's not the right way. But with high school kids, I thought it wasn't a big deal. And so afterwards, when I showed that picture of Darwin with a monkey tail, the kids laughed even more. They thought it was hilarious. They loved it. But when I asked the teacher afterwards, what do you think? What did you think of the presentation today? And normally, I'm not trying to brag here, but normally I get a very good response and they invite me back. But this one time, because I was tax, the teacher said, she said, I'm not going to invite you back again because, I teach the students in my room how we should, this was a class, I think, in religion, actually. Well, I teach my students how to respect everybody. And you were really poking fun at those atheists. So, I don't think that's, and I realized, wow, how sentimental these teachers of religion are. They're not even convinced that we should take a stand against the atheists. So, lesson learned. That was my little bit I wanted to say. Yes, Prabhu.
In 2000, Vrindavan, our oldest son, is actually a historian, a Vedic historian.
That's Vrindavan.
That's Vrindavan. Yes, Vrindavan. And got invited, and they invited us. He brought another devotee, Neil. I forget his last name. He's a professor of linguistics. He proved actually that, the whole theme of this meeting, where all the heads of Sanskrit departments came from around the world. I got to meet very interesting people, including Prabhupada's friend, who was an ex-minister of defense, and we walked together between classrooms and at Dartmouth, and he recited that he knew the entire Srimad Bhagavatam. But we were approached by the professors, thanking us, actually. They said, we cannot speak what you speak. If we do so, we'll be fired. Our tenure is in danger. And the name of the symposium or the meeting was Influence of Vedic Culture in the West. So our friend, the professor, I call him Professor Neil, he proved that actually English is a dialect of Sanskrit. And so he had about 1,000 words that, could be proven, that actually mean the same. The same with the Hawaiian language. One simple one is kula, for example, means school in Hawaiian, as we know in Sanskrit. But yeah, that was the main thing. And we were approached by, all kinds of professors. One of them was a professor, not religion. There is a name for the department. Anyhow, he was studying Rupa, Sanatana, and Jiva Goswamis, and he was telling us how Jiva Goswami was the greatest philosophy of all ages, and he was excusing himself for not yet he hadn't finished all the works of Sanatan. But yeah, that was the atmosphere. We were very welcome. The different classes that each one gave about Vedic culture and its influence in the West and the connections to the West, actually, how the whole planet was like that. So it's a really important moment. I think it's great that you brought this up, and I think this is great. It gives us a lot of ammunition to work in the world of academia, but at the same time, we have to be aware that they are very much, gotten into a fortress of, atheism, and they have, built it pretty well into the academic world. And if you start talking about Hinduism, and you, by the way, you sent me a documentary, remember, on
Yes.
India and Hinduism, and that was very interesting. And then I realized, boom, it clicked that, the word, if you bring Hinduism to the surface, it's like really, it's the powers of being. They don't really want to bring forth all the knowledge, the Vedic knowledge, the science, the true science, actually, I call it, but it's important. It's an important work that, should be at the forefront. So, thank this devotee for this book. Is really needed. As soon as I can get my hands on it, I will send it to this cousin, this famous neurosurgeon, who's a total atheist, but he thinks the brain is the cause of everything. I said, and he sends me this thing. No, now we mapped it, the whole brain and how it works, and in 40 seconds he showed me these films. I said, well, that's fantastic. It shows that there is some amazing intelligence behind it. He didn't say anything. He avoids the whole thing.
Thank you.
So thank you. I think that was important, Gaura. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Also,
Thanks,
the way
everyone.
it relates to Lord Chaitanya, as Krishna Chandra was saying, the prayers to Srila Prabhupada, we say Gauravani. So these are the instructions and the teachings of Lord Chaitanya. And so hearing the atheistic challenge, like he said, connects it all to the pranam mantras. But they're talking about creation coming from some sludge, really disgusting. And they thought that maggots spontaneously appeared from meat. And so their whole idea of creation and the appearance of life is really grotesque. And Chaitanya means living force. So my image of creation and the appearance of life is Lord Chaitanya appearing like the moon from the ocean of the womb of Sachi Devi, the embodiment of love of God.
And so, and also distinguishes us Gaudiyas, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati said, Vaishnavas worship Vishnu, Krishnas worship Krishna, and Gaudiyas worship Radhe. And so, but
Lord Chaitanya
is Radha Krishna combined, and he brings us everything, actually. I mean, studying Chaitanya Charitamrita, they asked Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, what book would you save if there is a, devastation?
Pralaya.
A pralaya, but then immediately say, oh, I'll swim the waters of devastation with Chaitanya Charitamrita clenched to my chest. It's got everything.
Today is the Krishna Chandra Prabhu told me is the day disappearance of his spiritual master Bhakti Vaibhav.
Yes.
We sent a message to Bhakti Siddhartha.
We went to the Arctic yesterday. It was his appearance day in India. So we attended on the internet. We attended the Arctic there. Anyway, this is Bhakti Vaibhav Puri. Can you see him?
It would have been nice to read about him.
The right-hand side.
The bottom photo.
Nice.
Okay.
Right. So we'll see everyone on Friday then.
Yes, please.
Jai ho. My dandavas to everyone.
Sanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namo.